My dad passed away. It was a Friday morning, and I got a call from my family that dad passed away and everything's been taken care of. Nothing for you to do. So what did that mean? That meant that his body was okay going to medical science and he was going to be cremated.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today is Tuva Sablosky, who has an incredible story that he's going to be sharing with us. Kind of a miracle story. Tuva, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here with
Thank
you,
you.
Hannah.
So your story is about really avoiding a cremation on your father's burial. And your father really wanted to be cremated. Your siblings, your family wanted to have him cremated, but you somehow maneuvered it so that he would get a proper Jewish burial. And I want you to tell us a little about that story, and then we'll go back to your own history and how we got there. But I found this so interesting because in today's times, I'm reading more and more how more and more Jews are unfortunately choosing to be cremated. I think you've worked with Rabbi Zahn from the National Chevra Kadisha, the National Institute of Burial, and
Yes.
he helped you in your story. And I've read that he said that the numbers are astounding on how many Jews are being cremated, close to up to almost half, 50% in some places. And first of all, why do you think it's so important for someone not to be cremated, to be buried properly according to Judaism?
It's so I knew nothing really about this until starting to become observant. And my mom had passed away and she was cremated. And I didn't start becoming observant until about after that time period. So I was really didn't know anything. I was basically ignorant about this whole topic and subject. But we're commanded by God to be buried. We're commanded not to destroy our bodies. We're commanded not to commit suicide. It's a destruction. We're commanded not to put tattoos on. So once you learn about these things, you start to research why would someone want to be cremated as opposed to someone being buried. So there's a lot of information out there, and I think one of the biggest problems is that people just don't know, and they're filled with a lot of information that's not correct about burial and cremation. So it's most important for people to really understand why we do what we do as Jewish people and why we don't do things that other countries may do. I did take, since we last spoke, some research about countries around the world and cremation. And the biggest country in the world for cremation, which is a country I've been to many, many times, is Japan. Close to 99.9% of the people in Japan
Oh,
are
wow.
cremated.
Wow.
So a lot of the Asian countries, it's very big. And the Jews, when we were in Europe and through our history, we weren't
Right.
cremated. Our enemies wanted to cremate and did get rid of it by
Right.
burning us. But the last thing we want to do is go against God's wishes. And unfortunately, in America, because people they assimilate, they pick up the customs of the local people, intermarried like I was, and we do what they're doing. So we listen to that.
Right.
So my objective is to powerfully impact with you and others the reason why it's very important to be Jewish, do Jewish things, be proud to be Jewish, and ultimately be
Right.
buried and definitely not be
100%.
cremated. So we need to reverse that here in the United States.
And really, the obligation on burial is on the next of kin, or in this case, you were a son of your father, and that's why you worked so
Yeah.
hard to make sure that he was not cremated. And it's interesting because
Yes.
we always listen to the will of the departed. Except in this area, when it comes to burial, even if they requested not to be buried, but to be cremated, we bury them properly because we understand that now they're in a higher world, in the world of truth, where this is ultimately where they would want to be done in the proper way according to the Judaism's laws of burial. So let's start a little with the story. What happened with your father? Why did he want to be cremated, and how did you actually get him to be buried according to Judaism, according to Jewish law?
So my mother and father, I was told that they made some pact that they were going to be cremated. And that's what happened with my mother back in 2008. And then I was told my dad wants to be cremated too. So I just left it alone. Wasn't something I knew about or cared. No one asked me. And then when I started becoming observant, when I met the Rebbetzin Young Race, the first time I met her, it was had a major impact on me. And I bought a book that she wrote called The Jewish Soul on Fire. And the word neshama was not part of my vocabulary. And reading this book really helped me understand what happened when my great grandfather came from with his family from Ukraine to Philadelphia, and it just assimilated. I think I'm the only observant Jew really in our family, probably for
Wow.
generations.
How did you grow up? Tell us a little about your background, how you grew up.
So I grew up in Philadelphia, born, raised, and educated in Philadelphia. I have two older sisters. I was the only
Mm.
boy. They were 7 and 5 years older than myself, and we grew up in a very nice, good Jewish family. As far as I was concerned, we were Reform, but I was not exposed to really any true Jewish customs. And my parents decided to send me to a all boys Quaker Christian prep school from the time I was five
Mm.
years old.
So did you do
So
any
that's what,
practices, any Jewish practices at all, or not really? Not much. Mm.
not really. I didn't have a bar mitzvah. I didn't have a proper
Mm.
bris. Um,
Wow.
so they're just, I never knew what Shabbos
Mm.
was, never saw Torah until I was about 50 years old and met the
Wow.
Rebbitzin.
Wow. Okay, go ahead. So you went to this Quaker.
So the last 15 years has been just a rocket ship. And when I got remarried, we just celebrated our anniversary last week. 12 years. It was when I married my wife, it was like putting turbochargers on the spaceship. And it's been flying ever since. So I do want to acknowledge my wife because without her, my spiritual journey would not be at the level it's at. And we continue to work with each other and push each other to continue to go to much higher
Wow.
levels.
And
So what happened was when um, once I learned that this was not the right thing to do, I started doing much more research, and I just moved out to Brooklyn in 2012. And in my neighborhood, 2 blocks from me, is a Chabad that was started by Rabbi Avraham Holtzberg, and he was my first rabbi out
mm,
here. So I told him about my story and my background, and I had questions about cremation and burial. Like, I don't understand. He goes, "There's someone I'd like you to speak to," which was Rabbi Zong.
and Rabbi Zahn is, just
And
for those who do not know, he is, tell us about him.
he is the founder and head of the National Heber Kaddish Association, which is headquartered in Queens but operates all over the United States. And their objective is to have people
Hmm.
buried. And they continue advances in an organization. And I heard few people mention his name, but it was really Rabbi Holtzberg that told me the first time, and other people just. So I called him up when we started speaking, and after my wife and I were married, we were back in the house where I had proposed to my wife in Teaneck, New Jersey, and we were with the couple that did our vart. And my wife saw Mishpacha magazine, and she saw an article about cremation. And she looked at it, she goes, "You should probably look at this." So I'm reading it, and there's a woman in there named Robin Meyerson who works from Arizona for the National Heber Kaddish Association. So I called her up because one of the skills that God gave me was to make cold
Mm.
calls and be fearless and to network. So I called her up and we talked, and it was suggested, maybe she'd be a good person to speak to my father and my sisters. And she said, I really don't want to get involved that way, but I can coach you as what to say. So fortunately, I had both Robin and Rabbi Zone, who worked very closely together, as really my coaches through this
Hmm.
process.
Wow. So what did they coach you? Like, how did that happen? What happened?
Well, they were giving me different things to say to my father and to my two older sisters. It was really my oldest sister who became the
Hmm.
trustee, and just explaining this. And this was going on for while I was becoming
Hmm.
observant, and here I am not wanting Dad to be cremated, and this was going on for several years, and I wasn't making much progress. My Kiruvim was not. It was just falling
So they
on
were not, they were not
deaf.
receptive. They were not receptive to what you were
There,
saying.
there, there was not receptive, and unfortunately, it just didn't go
Right.
anywhere
Wow.
with them, to the point where I
What
just was
what
told to just
what did
just
they think
forget.
about your becoming religious? How did they take to that?
They were fine
Hmm.
with it. Go do whatever you want to do, but we're going to keep doing what we want
Right.
to do.
Okay.
So
So
so I kept learning and doing,
right.
and
Okay.
and it was becoming very
And your father
frustrated.
was getting older and older, and you knew that this
He was getting older and
was
older,
something that he wanted.
And well, that was the probable, almost certain future. He was going to be his body donated to medical
Mm,
science and
mm.
cremated.
Both are things that in
And
Judaism we do not do because we look at the body as holy and to be returned to God and to be returned in the dust as God gave it to us. Right,
that's right. But if you don't know these
right,
things, you don't
right,
know. So a lot of people, the majority of people
right.
don't know. That's why more than 50% of the Jews in America are being
Wow.
cremated. I don't think this is happening in other countries like this. In California and Florida, it's more than
Oh my gosh.
70%.
Wow.
And I spoke with Robin yesterday. One Jew in every 16 minutes is being cremated, over 100 a
Ay,
day.
terrible.
So I did the math. It's, I think, 36,000 a year are basically being cremated. And when that occurs, this is why you learn from Rabbi Zone, you don't do anything. You don't sit
Mm,
Shiva. You don't rip your
mm.
clothes. You didn't say Kaddish. It's a non-event, and you go on with your
Right.
life.
Well,
And we really did not want that
yeah.
to
I mean,
happen.
I think it has to be asked what exactly happens. Like you can ask your local rabbi if you can do anything, but that's terrific. What to have this cremation happening, and that so many Jews are actually being cremated is really such a sad situation.
It's a sad commentary for America. There are three things that I really focus on in trying to shift and impact are fighting anti-Semitism, which I've been dealing with since going to this Quaker Christian prep school. I've been fighting as a kid, people calling me names and just because being Jewish.
How did that affect you
To
when you were a child and people were doing that?
I wasn't. I was a proud American Jew, and what really evolved over the last several years is I became a proud Jewish
Mm,
American.
mm-hmm,
So I was always fighting for myself. I didn't really know
mm-hmm.
why, but I just knew I was Jew, and okay, then I'm going to fight
Hmm.
for myself, not take this
Right.
stuff.
Wow. I wonder if percolating within your soul, within your neshama, was also, took many maybe years to for you to uncover it, but was percolating the question of how do I become more of a Jew and how do I reach into my traditions and understand it more, because that is what ultimately happened. So just getting back to the story with your father, let's hear what happened.
Sure. So I wasn't having much success. My wife was supporting me. I was speaking with different rabbis, speaking with Rabbi Zone, and about a couple weeks before my father passed away. At this point, I wasn't bringing the subject anymore. I was going down to visit him, staying with my sister, and I stopped along the way from one of my oldest friends from 10 years old that I went to camp with. All grew up like me in Baltimore. His older brother, a year older than him, had passed away. So I went down to make a Shiva call to see them in Baltimore and then go see my father. The trip was smooth with my family and with my sister. And 2 weeks later, on the 1st of Av, my dad passed
Mm,
away. It was a Friday morning. And I got a call from my family that dad passed away and everything's been taken care of. Nothing for you to do. So what did that mean? That meant that his body was okay going to medical science and he was going to be
mm,
cremated. So I called up Rabbi Zone and my wife came downstairs and she saw me crying. She wanted, what's going on? I couldn't talk. So I wrote her a note.
wow.
Dad passed away. So I called Rabbi Zone and I said, what do I do? He says, you don't do anything.
Mm,
You don't sit
mm,
Shiva. You don't rip your clothes. You don't say Kaddish. You go on. Go have a good Shabbos.
mm,
So that was so later that evening, a very close couple, Rabbi and Rebbitzin, came to visit us that evening, and we're talking. And I told him what Rabbi Zone said about doing this and not saying Kaddish, and the Rebbitzin said in her very sweet, calm voice, "You're not going to say Kaddish for your
mm,
father?" I said, "No, not good." She said, "You're not going to say Kaddish." She was floored, and that just kept vibrating. And she must have said it 3 or 4
mm.
times. So that night we had dinner, and the next day there was a big bar mitzvah at Rabbi Holtzberg's. So I went to my friend's bar mitzvah, and his wife had passed away earlier that year. So he has a son who was getting bar mitzvah and one daughter a little younger. And when I saw him, the two of us just,
Mm.
we lost it. We gave each other a big hug. We cried. And,
That was very emotional.
and that was it. yeah, that was probably one of the most emotional times with the whole process.
What why was it
So
so
Sunday
emotional? Because
morning,
that was when it hit you that this is what was happening to your father? Yeah. And that
I,
and the
I
loss
guess
that you
so,
just really suffered, it's compounded
right? And his
in his
loss also.
loss,
It
right.
was like
Wow. Wow.
so the next morning, Sunday morning, I woke up and Hashem put in my mind to find out about the will. I never sold this
Mm,
will. And I had told that the will had been changed a few years before, that it was changed so that there would be no burial and that my dad's body would be donated to medical science and to uh, and then be cremated, and that I would not be part of that process. So I was taken out of being an administrator or executor of the will. My two sisters were those two.
did they
So
take
I
you out
called up my.
because you were observant or
They took me out because I was really
pressing?
pressing not to have
Right.
this happen, and they knew it was a threat that
Right.
you know if he got involved, who knows what
Right.
would happen. So exit stage left and exit. I was out of the picture, except for Hashem brought me back into the
Right.
picture. So Sunday morning, I called my sister and I said, I never sold the will. I'd like to see the will. She said, well, I haven't seen it for some time. Why don't I send you a copy? I said, that would be great. Send our other sister a copy also. So I got the will on Monday morning and I'm reading it, and it was prepared in 1984. And in it said my parents should be buried, the estate should pay for the burial, and I could see where I was taken out, but there was nothing in there about
Cremation.
cremation and
Wow.
medical
Wow.
science.
So you think you're
So I called up my
yeah.
wife, and who's an attorney, and I said, I've just read this will. There's nothing in
Wow.
here. And I know legal documents pretty well also because of the things I do in business. So she said, I'm going to act like you're in court, and I'm going to test you on a few questions to actually prepare you maybe. So she did
Like
that, and I
what kind of
answered the
questions?
questions. I don't even
But you mean
remember.
things that the judge might ask you?
Yes, that they would want to see if I have a
Right.
case. So she said, you did well. So I called Rabbi Zone and I said, I got the will. And I read to him. And he said, I'm going to test you to see if you could handle this in court.
Exact
Did the
same.
exact same thing. And she already did. That's how I had the
Wow.
answers to a lot of the questions. So he was convinced. He goes, okay, let's go find the
Wow. Why do
body.
you think your father didn't change the will to write that he wanted to be cremated and his body donated to science?
Maybe he really didn't want to be
Mm,
cremated and donated to
wow.
science. Hashem controls everything.
Wow.
So
Interesting. Who
who
knows?
things we forget things. We do things. We
Right.
forget things. So that piece
Wasn't
wasn't
there.
amended
Right.
and
Wow.
changed. So all of a sudden,
So
here
you
we
had a
go.
leeway,
It's
something.
Monday morning. He passed away Friday morning. It's now Monday morning, and we're searching for the body. And Rabbi Zoom put together a SWAT team, starting with himself, a gentleman in Philadelphia, Rabbi David Kushner, and he orchestrated the chief for the Hever Kedusha Association in Maryland and the chief rabbi of Maryland, because my sister, although my dad had been living in Philadelphia, my sister moved him to Bethesda so she could take care of him as he got older and better care of him. So he was now in Maryland
Mm, mhm.
someplace. So that's why they contacted
Philadelphia
Philadelphia down to Maryland. So we're all starting to
for
look
the body.
for the body. So Monday night, my wife said, "Why don't you call up your sister and ask her
Where is he?
what'd she do and what?" So I called, and it was about 10, and she had already gone to sleep. My brother-in-law said she's already went to sleep, and I said, "Great."
Did she know at
So
that point that you saw that the will did not say that he should be cremated? No.
no,
Okay.
no, I didn't
Right.
communicate that. I don't think I
Right.
communicated that. So then I ended up calling back, and my brother-in-law, I said, "Well, do you have any idea what she did with the bike?" Is I don't know, and he's a doctor. This is your thing with your sister. It's not, I have nothing to
Right.
do with it. Um, so any idea what she may have done? She goes, well, maybe it went to such and such a place. So I called up, found the phone number. I called up the place. It's a medical place, does this kind of work and then takes care of the cremation. So I called up, and the woman kind of, it sounded like she kind of knew what I was talking about. And she was saying, I can't tell you anything. There's no information. And I said, look, I have information that he's
Mhm.
here. If he's here and you're not divulging that, I'll be there in the morning with the police, and we'll find out if he's
Wow.
there or not. 10 minutes later, the owner of the facility calls back, Mr. Sablosky. Don't worry about it. Your dad's fine. Nothing's been taken care of. Nothing's happened. And this afternoon, a group of rabbis spoke to me, and we had to stop the whole
Oh, wow.
process.
Who was that?
So that was Rabbi Zone
So,
and the chief rabbi in the
wow.
state of Maryland, and the Hever Kedushas. So, but they never called me because that was done Tuesday afternoon. I'm busy still looking for the
How
body,
did they find it? How did
and
they
I
know
make
where it
the
was? They found it. They did their work. Wow.
it was a SWAT team. It was
Wow.
like, the way the Israelis and the soldiers,
Wow.
we go, when we make up our minds to do things, we get things done.
Absolutely.
But they forgot
Oh.
to tell me. So I'm busy looking all, so I'm calling the 10. I got
Right.
found it. 10 o'clock. Oh, we already know
Oh,
about it. We already
wow.
stopped everything.
Wow.
So that was pretty incredible. But we had a short time fuse because we wanted the body buried before Friday afternoon, before
Mhm. And
Shabbos.
this was what day?
So we
This was already
this was
Tuesday night,
Tuesday
right?
night.
Okay.
Um, this was Tuesday night. So in speaking with my sister, I was already driving down to Washington to go to Bethesda to go find out what was
Mhm.
going on, to find the
Mhm.
body and to figure out how to bring it back. And in speaking with my sister, I was driving. I was on the Bell Parkway, and I literally was stuck in traffic. And my sister called, and she said, "How are you doing?" Great, great. She said, "What did you do?" I said, "What do you mean? What did I do?" She goes, "What did you do?" I said, "With what?" She goes, "With Dad's body." I said, "I didn't do anything with Dad's body." She goes, "Well, the whole process got stopped.
Mm.
A group of rabbis came in and stopped the process." I said, I couldn't control them. They heard, and so there's silence on the phone. I'm glad that the car was just stopped. So she said, "Well, what do you want?" I said, "I want to bury our father's
Mm.
body. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less." So then there's silence on the phone, and she said, "Okay, you can have the body."
Wow.
And I'm glad I wasn't driving because I probably would have hit something at
Right.
that point.
Wow.
Uh, she said there are two conditions. One, that you don't sue me or anybody in the family. I said, I'm not interested in suing anybody. And my parents had two burial plots in
Mm.
Philadelphia. They were buried near my mother's
Mhm.
parents, and then my father's family was buried in another part of the same Roosevelt cemetery. She said, "I'd like to have those burial plots." I said,
Mm.
"No problem. You can have the burial
Mm.
plots."
Wow.
Because I had another idea where I wanted to bury my dad,
Wow.
and it wasn't those burial plots because he didn't want to be buried in those burial plots.
Really?
I think that may have been one of the reasons they didn't get buried, was because they didn't want to be in those burial
Oh,
plots.
wow. So where did you wanna bury him? In a different place?
Um, Different. So through all of this and the research, my wife and I took a trip to the Ukraine the summer before he was passed away, and it was a 10-day trip with Rabbi Pesach Krohn, and that's another person who's had a very big impact in my life. Another story, if you'd like, at another time. We went with him, and one of the reasons my wife wanted to go was because Rabbi Levi Yitzhak Berdichev is one of her favorite rabbis, and that was one of the kebras that we'd be
Oh,
going to.
wow.
So on the way to meet them in Kiev, the
I
trip
is your
started in
wife
Kiev.
Hasidic? Is that she had
She comes from a big Hasidic
family?
family from Borough
Wow,
Park in
okay, so
Williamsburg.
that's why she was felt a close connection to
Yes.
Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichev.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I'd heard about him because Rabbi Holtzberg talks about
Right,
him a lot, and the Baal Shem
right,
Tov. And
sure.
so I was up to, if she wanted to go on the trip and I was happy. I love to
Right.
travel. So this was the first time probably anybody's gone back to Ukraine since my great grandfather left. My grandfather left in the
This is your
1880s.
great-grandfather? Your grandfather?
Great
Wow.
grandfather. And my grandfather, who I was named after, Thomas, he had come.
With your great-grandfather to America.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that was when the
They,
assimilation started. That was when they
that's when it just like, because people came, they wanted to be like, they were leaving the
Sure.
pilgrimage.
They
They didn't
wanted to
want
leave
to be beat up. And they wanted to leave and be in a safe
leave the
environment. And
persecution.
they wanted to become Americans. They wanted to become
Right.
Americans.
Wow.
They were happy to be
Right.
Americans and do what
Right.
Americans do. So so on the trip to Ukraine, we arranged to stop in Vienna
Mm-hmm.
first, the first night and the last night. We stayed in this magnificent, beautiful hotel. The first night, old, beautiful hotel. And my friend, because I used to go to Vienna a lot for business, who worked for Siemens, was their software think tank is headquartered in Vienna, Austria, not in Germany. And I'd been there many times with him, and we traveled around the world doing business together. And I called him, and he said, "I'll come pick you up at the airport." I said, "Great." And he's not
Mm-hmm.
Jewish. So we went to see the Hatam Sofer.
Chassam Sofer. Wow.
Hatam
Oh.
Sofer. So here we go underground. My friend puts on a yarmulke, and he's just enjoying experiencing it because we experienced a lot of things together. And then my wife knew from her cousin Simcha that her great 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 grandparents were buried in the cemetery right next to where the Hatam Sofer was. So we were going there to actually find their
Oh, wow.
covers. And he gave her instructions how to do it, but we were having a hard time finding it. It was about 95 degrees out. It was in the middle of August. And my wife went up and down that cemetery, and there was someone that we called who manages the cemetery. She goes, "I remember your grandparents. I know all these people, an older woman." And she goes, "They're over
Mm.
there." So my wife said, "I went there. They're not there." She goes, "Well, I think they might be over there." So my wife actually found them after about an hour going up and down this. And one of the covers had been already a lot of the lettering you couldn't see, and the other one was so. So my wife was able to orchestrate having those
Mm. The
refaced
burial
and
plots. Wow.
repolished. And her name is named after this great great great
Oh, wow. So
grandmother,
special.
Sheva Ruckel. Sheva
Wow.
Ruckel. So that was amazing. That's how we started our trip
To the Ukraine.
to
Right.
Ukraine. So that was an incredible trip. That could be a whole nother story. And when we got back, I said, "I want to find my
Oh,
great
that's what pushed you
grandparents."
to find yours. Right.
Yes. So we went to an old synagogue, I forget the name of it, in Philadelphia, closer to the
Mm-hmm.
city. And we went there, and it's a very old cemetery. It's broken down. And you call the phone number, and the person answers, "I'm sick. I'm not well. We have no information. We can't
Mm.
help you." Nothing. And then Googling, it says the cemetery is just not organized. You can't find anything. So we go in, and it's big, and there's just one road down. And I said to my wife, "Just the way you found your grandparents, we're going to find my great
Mm.
grandparents too." So we're driving down, and we come to a cross. So I make a right, and it's a one-way street, the wrong way, but no one's there, so it doesn't matter. No one's in the cemetery. I see out of the corner of my eye the tombstone being blocked by a big bush with SKY. My last name's
Mm.
Sablosky. So I said to my wife, "I think I found them." She goes, "You're kidding. No way. No way you found them." I said, "I'm going to get out and look." And I pull it back, and there was
Mm.
Sablosky. So there were three stones that were there. My grandfather, my great grandfather, great grandmother, and some other relative. There was one that had been already vacated because my grandmother, Lydia, when my grandfather passed away, she was moving everybody to Roosevelt Cemetery, which is a more modern cemetery outside in the suburbs of Philadelphia.
Mm.
So he had been born there, the grandpa, but they moved him.
Wow.
So my wife said it was all covered with grass and everything. She said, "Pull back the grass and let's see what it says." And then she starts crying because in Hebrew, that's Hebrew and English, she sees that it's your grandfather. It was, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday. She said, "Your grandfather's yard site is this
Oh,
Sunday."
wow. And that's when you went. Wow.
Great grandfather. It's this Sunday, and it's the yard site of Rabbi Levi Yitzhak Bedichev, same yard
The
site.
person
And it was my
who
wife's,
motivated you to actually go there, right?
yep, yep. And my wife's birthday and Rabbi
Oh,
Holtzberg's
wow.
birthday.
Wow. Wow. Incredible.
So
What
it
divine
was,
providence. Incredible.
it was too
Wow.
much. Um, so then I started doing more research. I'd gone, to find out about the plots and where my parents were and everything in that cemetery. And I found out there was a vacant lot next to my grandmother
Mm.
Esther, grandfather Thomas, and my dad's only sister had been buried there. There was a vacant
Mm.
plot. And I found out that if it was possible, my dad could be buried
Wow.
there.
Wow. Amazing.
And fast forward, that's exactly what
That's what
happened.
happened. Wow. Ha
Yeah. And if we hadn't taken the train to the Ukraine, we hadn't done all of these different things. I don't know how this would have all happened,
wow.
but Hashem was orchestrating everything from start to finish.
Incredible. Wow.
And having an observant wife, she was focusing a lot on speaking to rabbis, having, and we were doing a lot of davening and praying, doing, giving money to this and this for the zahus that my dad would get
And that
buried.
merit. Wow. What did your sister think of it?
One,
Like, what happened after? Was she accepting of the whole burial? Do you get along with her? How did that work?
it was very
Mhm, mhm,
tricky because there definitely wasn't buy-in, and something happened that people were not expecting, and I never thought this would have
mhm,
happened. But what ended up happening was, on that Wednesday, my sister agreed, okay, I'll send you agreement, send me a 5-page agreement, which would not have necessarily
mhm,
signed, but given the time was of the essence, I wasn't going to be
mhm.
negotiating things in this
Right.
agreement, because we needed to have the body released by 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon so they could go through all the preparation and cleaning, be delivered and brought up to Philadelphia for burial by noon, before noon on
Wow.
Friday. So I ended up signing the agreement. My wife said, just sign the agreement. I signed it, sent it back, and then didn't hear from my sister.
Mhm. And she's the one
So
and
here
she's
it
the
is.
power of attorney, so she's the one that has to
She's a power of
give
attorney. I have no
permissions.
power. She has to give
Right.
permission. Um, so it's 12 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock, and you got all these people involved with this
Sure.
process in Philadelphia, New York, and Baltimore, and the people were waiting to. They said, we're not releasing until we get
Mhm.
this release. So here it is. It's 2 o'clock. Everybody's in, and we need it by
You must have been
3.
pins and needles. So nervous.
Nothing was
Right.
going on, and then we're all on the phone, countdown, 2:45, nothing going on. At 2:50, they said, we hear a fax coming
Mm.
in. At 2:50, the fax
From your
came in.
sister. Wow.
Yes, and the body was released at time at three
What
o'clock.
was what
The
was the
rabbi,
delay? She just had to think about it? She wasn't sure about it? You don't
I
know.
didn't ask, but
Right. Hashem just
Hashem
did it.
is
Wow.
orchestrating. So happy to
There's, like,
release him.
such mixed emotions. On the one hand, your father passed away, it's so sad, but on the other hand, you're so relieved that he's getting this proper burial, and
Yep,
that's quite a
and that my sister agreed that we
right.
could do it.
Wow. I find it
So
interesting, though, that your sister requested that she gets those 2 burial plots that your parents were originally supposed to be buried in, and I'm wondering, like, maybe she wants to use it for herself in the future.
I, I don't know that that would be what she would
Right.
want, but we have two
Mm.
cousins. My mom's sister's buried there, and we have two girl cousins, and maybe they're going to be the ones who can get buried with their
Wow,
parents.
interesting. Wow, very interesting. Wow, that's quite an amazing story. What do you feel
Yep, it
looking
was.
how long ago was this?
This was in 2018.
2018. So
Yep, and my dad's yard site's coming up on the first
oh,
of Av.
wow. Wow. So looking back, how do you feel about the whole story, the whole episode?
Looking back, the most important thing is that I'm glad that Hashem took me out of the schmutz I was living
Mhm.
in, because really I was like at the 49th level of just being so far away from real Yiddishkeit, or my Jewish background. And he literally took me out of that and put me into amazing space.
You were showing me also before some of the books that you are studying right now.
Yes. So I'll share with that. So in addition to Rabbi Holtzberg, I met and have been learning with Dr. Gedalia Sheckman. And he started having me learn Tanya. We started with a small version,
Tanya,
and then this is the big
right?
one. But we've been learning Tanya almost every week together. We're learning tonight,
Can you share with us
for about eight
wow,
years. For about eight
incredible. Can you
years.
share with us an inspiration that you have from Tanya?
So my wife said after the first time I started reading that, she could see a shift, a change in who I was being and what I was doing, what I was
What
thinking.
kind of shift? What do you feel it was?
It just connects you much more to your Yiddishkeit and to your
Mm,
soul. So we're learning a lot of the basis on the animal soul and the godly
mhm,
soul. So we don't know that
right.
stuff. We think we're a human soul, but the way it's delineated in the observant world, in the Jewish world, is we have an animal soul and we have a godly
Mhm.
soul, and the objective is to change who you are and change your mitos for the good, which I need a lot of
Your
changing,
characteristics,
because
yes.
I had a little bit of anger, right? But that dissipated, a lot of this stuff dissipated, and I learned about how to refine myself and have better
Wow,
meters,
incredible.
which is an ongoing polishing and lifelong
Right.
process. So the Tanya and going deep into that is very helpful to better understand. But it's not the easiest
Of
stuff to learn.
course.
It's very high level. It's very
You've gone through such a journey. Is there any, and an incredible story? What a mitzvah you did for your father. Is there any parting words you'd like to share with us? Any message you'd like to share with us on the topic or on your journey?
Sure. So I just turned 65, right? I'm planning to live to at least
Mm.
120. And this fight with anti-Semitism's been with me really my whole life. So for me, the fight is to continue waking up people so we can better fight the anti-Semitism, we can better fight the assimilation, and we can better fight the cremation because they all go hand in
Right.
hand.
And it's all through mitzvot, through
So
lighting the lights, dispelling,
it's all through lighting
lighting light.
lights.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tuvia.
My
you can
pleasure.
tell that you're on fire. Your journey has been an incredible journey, and you're obviously on fire to do amazing things to help Judaism and help Jewish people become alive and to follow the traditions like you have learned to follow in your own life. So thank you again for joining us. Wow, what an incredible story, Tuvia's journey and his story of how this son is just trying so hard to get his father buried properly according to Judaism, according to Jewish law, how he knows this is good for his father's soul. And he's trying so hard to convince first his father when he was alive and next his family and his sisters, and there's so much resistance, but he finally does actually get his way through God's helping, the hand of God. You see it over and over in the story, how he finally, when he put in the effort, how God helps us and shows us the way. Also, it was really, really so evident in this story is Tuvia's own souls. It's tugging him from when he was this young boy in this Quaker school, knowing so little or nothing about his Judaism. When he saw so much anti Semitism, something in him was pulling him to rediscover who he was, what he was, and to finally embrace it in the most beautiful way. It was obvious that there's so much more to Tuvia and his story, and how he is just so full of that passion and light in being a connected Jew who now knows who he is and what he is. If you enjoyed watching this video, I hope you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary in order to get these videos in your inbox. I hope you also know that we are available on all podcast platforms. You can watch us there. Like us, let us know, write a comment. We love to hear from you. And we're so happy that you've joined us and you are a part of this truly extraordinary community. Thanks for joining us.